All right, everyone get ready, because we are going deep on Woodrow Wilson today.
Oh, yeah, this is going to be a good
You
one.
guys sent in some great material on him.
Yeah, a history podcast,
It's going to be a wild ride, I can already tell.
for sure.
This is a president full of contradictions,
Absolutely.
and his impact is still felt today.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So much of what we're dealing with today goes right back to him.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking the rise of the progressive era, the expansion of government power, racial tensions, America stepping onto the world stage,
All that good stuff.
and Woodrow Wilson right at the center of it all.
Yep, front and center.
Okay, so to kick things off, let's set the scene a little bit.
Right?
It's 1913 New York City.
Okay.
The Woolworth building, the tallest building in the world at the time.
Wow.
It's opening its doors.
Viv,
It's this gleaming symbol of American progress and ambition.
I can just picture it.
80,000 light bulbs illuminated the city skyline.
80,000.
And guess who gets the honor of flipping the switch?
Ooh.
Remotely from Washington, D.C. I don't know.
Woodrow Wilson,
Of course.
the newly inaugurated president of the United States.
Oof, what a way to start a presidency, huh?
This isn't just any presidency.
It's not.
Wilson is the 28th president,
Mm-hmm.
the first Democrat elected since Grover Cleveland 20 years prior.
Wow, that's a long time.
But even more significant,
Tell me more.
he's the first Southern-born president since the Civil War.
Wow. Talk about a turning point.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
So who was this guy before he stepped into the Oval Office?
Well, think historian, author, university president, even a state governor.
Wow, he's done it all.
And, he was really steeped in that lost cause ideology.
The narrative that romanticized the Confederacy.
Exactly, and downplayed the horrors of slavery.
That's a really important point because this background, no doubt, shaped his views on race and his approach to reconciliation as president.
Yeah, for sure.
So he's a scholar of American government, but with this very specific Southern perspective.
What motivated him to even seek the presidency in the first place?
Well, he saw himself as uniquely qualified for the job, and he had this incredible ability to connect with diverse groups within the Democratic Party.
Like, who are we talking here?
Labor leaders, intellectuals, reformers.
A real coalition.
They all saw something in Wilson.
And then there's the 1912 election,
Oh, yeah, that was a wild one.
one of the most chaotic in American history.
Absolutely.
You have a split in the Republican Party with Teddy Roosevelt's third party run,
Right.
and then the surprising strength of the socialist candidate, Eugene Debs.
Mm-hmm.
How does Wilson manage to emerge victorious in all of this?
It was this perfect storm,
Like, how so?
The Republican Party was totally fractured, which created this opportunity for a Democrat to capitalize on the divided vote.
That makes sense.
And while Wilson and Teddy Roosevelt had very different styles, they both tapped into this growing desire for progressive reform.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
People were concerned about corporate power, economic inequality, the need for social justice.
So much change happening at the time.
Exactly. And Wilson managed to position himself as the candidate who could deliver on these promises.
And his victory really did shift the Democratic Party toward a more progressive stance.
Absolutely. And it solidified its association with labor and social reform.
So Wilson's win reshaped the Democratic Party, ushered in this new era of progressivism.
It did.
What did that actually look like in terms of policies? How did he expand the role of the federal government?
Well, one of the most significant examples is the establishment of the Federal Reserve in 1913.
Oh, the Fed.
Right before the Fed, the U.S. economy was prone to these wild swings,
Between booms and busts?
Yeah, imagine the uncertainty and the risk for everyday people and businesses.
It must have been chaotic.
The Fed was created to smooth out those rides, to bring some stability and predictability to the financial system.
Okay, so the Federal Reserve, with its 12 separate units across the country, designed to stabilize the economy. That's a pretty big deal.
It is a big deal.
What other significant changes did Wilson oversee?
Another major development was the creation of the Federal Trade Commission.
The FTC.
Yes, in 1914.
Okay.
This was all about regulating business practices, preventing monopolies, and making sure there was fair competition.
It sounds kind of dry,
I know it might sound dry.
but it's still so relevant today.
Oh, absolutely. Think about it.
Yeah, like how so?
Well, the current head of the FTC, Lena Khan,
I've heard of her.
she's making waves with her attempts to ban non-compete agreements.
Those clauses that can restrict workers from switching jobs?
Exactly.
That's a big deal.
It is.
It's amazing to see how policies from Wilson's era are still being debated today.
Isn't it?
It really shows you how connected we are to the past.
It really does.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing for Wilson, was it?
Not at all.
We've talked about the good, but what about the bad, especially when it comes to his record on race?
Yeah, this is where Wilson's legacy gets a lot more complicated.
Yeah, like how so?
Well, he championed these progressive ideals on the world stage, but simultaneously he allowed for the segregation of federal government departments directly impacting Black employees.
Wow.
And this is all happening during the Great Migration when Black Americans are fleeing the South for better opportunities.
So they're facing discrimination and violence in the South,
Right.
and then encounter segregation and limited opportunities in the North.
Exactly.
It's just heartbreaking.
It was a time of tremendous social and political change.
Yeah.
Racial tensions were running high.
And then in the midst of all this, Wilson decides to screen The Birth of a Nation at the White House.
Hold on, The Birth of a Nation?
Yeah.
That film glorifies the Ku Klux Klan
It does.
and portrays Black people in such a dehumanizing way.
Mm-hmm.
How could a president, especially one who considered himself progressive, condone such a film?
We have to remember The Birth of a Nation was a cinematic masterpiece for its time,
I mean, I guess.
even though its portrayal of the Reconstruction era was deeply distorted and racist.
What's even more troubling is that the film's captions actually included quotes from Wilson's own historical writings praising the Ku Klux Klan
Really?
as a force for order in the post-Civil War South.
Is there a specific quote that stands out?
Yeah, one that sends chills down my spine is this.
Okay. Yeah.
The white men were roused by a mere instinct of self-preservation until at last there had sprung into existence a great Ku Klux Klan, a veritable empire of the South to protect the Southern country.
It's just difficult to grapple with the fact that those words came from the President of the United States.
I know.
This was a time when deep-seated racism permeated society, even at the highest levels.
Absolutely.
And the screening of The Birth of a Nation had a very real impact.
It did,
It helped reignite the Ku Klux Klan.
which had been largely suppressed since Reconstruction.
Wow.
This resurgence fueled by racial anxieties and a desire to maintain white supremacy.
This is heavy stuff.
It would cast a long shadow over the coming decades.
So while Wilson is making strides in some areas, his actions on race are deeply troubling.
They are.
What was the response from Black leaders at the time?
It was complex.
How so?
Figures like W.E.B. Du Bois, who had initially supported Wilson, were incredibly critical of his racial policies.
It had to be.
But at the same time, they urged Black Americans to support the war effort during World War I, hoping to prove their patriotism and earn respect.
Imagine the difficult choices Black Americans faced at the time.
Exactly.
It's a reminder that history is rarely black and white.
It's not.
It's full of nuances and contradictions.
Mm.
So we've talked about domestic turmoil, but the world is also on the brink of war.
Right.
What was Wilson's stance on this escalating conflict in Europe?
Initially, Wilson advocated for neutrality.
Okay.
He understood that America as a nation built by immigrants had strong ties to both sides of the conflict.
So staying out of it would keep the country united.
Exactly. He didn't want to see the country divided, especially on the world stage.
A divided nation entering a global war.
Could have been disastrous.
But despite this official neutrality, you mentioned that the U.S. was already financially supporting the Allied forces.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so despite Wilson's pronouncements of neutrality,
Okay.
the U.S. was already entangled in the conflict, at least economically.
I see.
They were providing significant financial support to Great Britain.
Primarily.
Yeah, primarily.
Yeah.
This wasn't exactly a secret,
Right.
and it put Wilson in a very tricky position.
He's trying to keep America out of the war while also supporting one side over the other.
Yeah, real balancing act.
What ultimately led to America's entry into the war?
Well, there were several factors, but the sinking of the Lusitania in 1915 was a major turning point.
The Lusitania.
Yeah, the British ocean liner that was torpedoed by a German U-boat.
Killing over 1,200 people, including over 100 Americans.
Exactly. It was horrific tragedy.
Horrible.
It sparked outrage across the U.S.
Of course.
and fueled public calls for war.
And Wilson had campaigned on keeping America out of the war.
Yeah, it must have been incredibly difficult for him to maintain his stance of neutrality.
Yeah, especially with public opinion shifting so dramatically.
Absolutely.
It sounds like he was caught between his desire for peace and the growing pressure to intervene.
He was.
And this was a defining moment in his presidency. setting the stage for America's eventual entry into World War I.
It was.
It's credible how much we've covered already.
I know, right?
From the gleaming opening of the Woolworth Building to the complexities of Wilson's domestic and foreign policies.
We've gone all over the place.
It's like we're watching history unfold before our eyes.
I love it.
But you mentioned Wilson's vision for the League of Nations.
I did.
That sounds like a whole other chapter in this story.
It is.
Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so the League of Nations,
This was his big idea.
it was Wilson's ambitious attempt to reshape the world order in the wake of World War I.
Wow.
It's a story that intertwines pre-war peace movements with his own grand vision. Yeah. It was born out of the devastation of World War I, this collective desire to prevent such horrors from ever happening again.
Yeah, like imagine a world where countries could resolve their differences through diplomacy, not warfare.
It was a powerful vision, and Wilson, with his eloquence and, moral authority, became the driving force behind this ambitious project.
He really believed in it, huh?
Oh, yeah. He believed that America, as this beacon of democracy, had a moral obligation to lead the way.
I can just picture him on the world stage, rallying nations to come together for the greater good.
Oh, absolutely.
But there's this irony, right?
There is.
The U.S., the country that spearheaded the creation of the League of Nations,
Right.
didn't even join.
It's true. And it's a story of political maneuvering, clashing ideologies, and even personal tragedy.
Okay, so what happened?
The Republican-controlled Senate was deeply skeptical of the League.
They were.
Yeah, they feared it would drag the U.S. into foreign conflicts and undermine American sovereignty.
So they were worried about being pulled into another European war.
Exactly.
America's interest would be sacrificed for the sake of international cooperation.
Right. They believed in a more isolationist approach, prioritizing American interests above all else.
I see.
And leading this opposition was Henry Cabot Lodge,
Oh, wow.
a longtime rival of Wilson's.
So it's like this whole personal rivalry thing, too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It's fascinating how this debate between engagement and isolationism has shaped American foreign policy throughout history.
It really has.
But even with this opposition, Wilson fought hard for the treaty, right?
He did. He embarked on this grueling speaking tour across the country, trying to rally public support.
Oh, wow.
But imagine this, in the midst of this campaign,
Wow.
Wilson suffers a debilitating stroke,
Oh, wow.
leaving him partially paralyzed and unable to effectively advocate for his vision.
That's awful. To have this grand vision for a more peaceful world
I know.
and then be physically unable to fight for it.
It's a reminder of the personal toll that leadership can take, especially during times of immense pressure. And without Wilson at the helm, the treaty faced an uphill battle in the Senate.
So what happened? Did the treaty pass?
Sadly, it did not, despite Wilson's efforts.
Wow.
The treaty failed to get the necessary two-thirds majority in the Senate.
So close.
The U.S. remained outside of this new international organization.
That must have been a huge disappointment for Wilson.
Oh, it was?
And some historians argue that America's absence from the League actually weakened it,
Yeah.
potentially contributing to the rise of global tensions that led to World War II.
It's a thought-provoking what-if scenario, isn't it?
It really is.
How might the world have been different if the U.S. had joined the League?
It's hard to say.
Yeah,
Okay, so we've talked about Wilson's grand vision for the world,
we have.
but let's shift gears back to the domestic front for a second.
Right.
We've seen the good, the bad, and the complicated when it comes to his legacy.
Mm-hmm.
Can we sum up the key takeaways for our listener?
Absolutely. So, Woodrow Wilson was a president of immense consequence, leaving behind a legacy marked by both progressive triumphs and troubling contradictions.
It's a mixed bag.
It is.
For sure.
He expanded the power of the federal government in ways we still feel today.
Oh, yeah.
From the Federal Reserve to the FTC,
Big changes.
he led the nation through World War I
Yeah.
and championed a vision for international cooperation that, while failing in the U.S., planted the seeds for future global institutions.
So a lot of good there.
Absolutely.
And his racial policies, as we've discussed, are a stark reminder that even the most progressive figures can hold views that are reprehensible by today's standards.
It's true. It's a reminder that history is complex and nuanced,
Mm-hmm.
full of heroes and villains, and often individuals who embody both.
Yeah, like Wilson.
Exactly.
It's up to us to grapple with those complexities, to learn from the past, and to
Yes.
strive for a more just and equitable future.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
You mentioned that Wilson expanded the role of the federal government in ways we still feel today.
I did.
Can you give us a specific example?
Well, think about the presidency itself. Wilson was a master communicator.
He was.
A skilled orator who understood the power of language.
Powerful speeches.
Oh, yeah. He revived the tradition of delivering the State of the Union address in person, speaking directly to Congress and the American people.
Wow.
It was a way to connect with the public, to rally them behind his vision.
So he was a media-savvy president long before the age of television and social media.
Absolutely. He also embraced these new technologies, like the phonograph,
Really?
to spread his message even further.
That's smart.
He understood that the presidency wasn't just a political office, but a bully pulpit.
A platform to shape public opinion.
Exactly.
But wasn't there a danger in that? I mean, we've seen how he used his platform to promote views on race that were harmful.
Right.
Could you say he was manipulating public opinion?
It's a valid point. Wilson's presidency raises questions about the power of persuasion,
Yeah.
the responsibility of leaders, and the potential for manipulation, especially with new technologies.
And those questions are still relevant today.
Oh, absolutely. As we grapple with the role of media and technology in shaping our political landscape.
For sure. It's mind-boggling to think how much has changed since Wilson's time.
I know.
Yet how many of the challenges and debates he faced still resonate today.
That's the power of history.
It is.
It's a mirror reflecting both our progress and our enduring struggles.
I like that.
And it's up to us to learn from the past and to use those lessons to create a better future.
We've talked about Wilson's impact on the presidency, but what about his lasting impact on American politics as a whole?
Well, Wilson's presidency really laid the groundwork for the modern political landscape.
Okay.
His progressive reforms, the expansion of the federal government, the debates over America's role in the world.
It's all connected.
These are all issues that continue to shape our political discourse today.
And what about his legacy on race? How should we reconcile his progressive ideals with his deeply flawed views and actions?
It's a crucial question.
Yeah.
And one that historians continue to grapple with. Wilson's story is a reminder that progress isn't always linear.
Right.
He championed democratic ideals on the world stage while enacting discriminatory policies at home.
Such a contrast.
It's a stark contrast that forces us to confront the complexities of history.
Yeah. It's like he embodies the best and the worst of his time.
Yeah, a brilliant mind, capable of great vision, but also a product of his upbringing and, the prevailing prejudices of his era.
Exactly. And that's why studying history is so important.
Right.
We need to understand the context in which these figures operated to learn from their triumphs and their failings.
Absolutely.
So where does all this leave us?
Yeah.
What's the lasting impact of Wilson's presidency for someone listening right now?
Well, he expanded the role of the federal government in ways that still affect your life today.
Okay.
From the stability of our financial system, thanks to the Federal Reserve, to the regulations that protect consumers, thanks to the FTC.
Those are huge.
They are.
And we can't forget how he shaped the modern presidency.
No, we can't.
Think about how presidents communicate today, how they use their platform to influence public opinion and advance their agendas.
Right.
That blueprint goes right back to Wilson.
It does.
He also set the stage for America's role as a global leader.
Yeah.
Even though his vision for the League of Nations ultimately failed here in the U.S., it was a setback for sure.
It was.
But it also planted the seeds for future international cooperation.
Right.
The idea that nations must work together to solve global problems.
It's a powerful idea.
It is. Okay,
Yeah.
so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
We've seen Wilson's progressive reforms, his expansion of government power, his complex foreign policy, and his deeply troubling record on race.
It's a lot.
It is. So, with all of these contradictions, how should we view Woodrow Wilson today?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It feels like it.
And there's no easy answer. He left behind a mixed legacy, one that includes both significant achievements and profound failings.
It feels almost impossible to separate the good from the bad.
And that's the point.
Is it?
History isn't about passing judgment from a distance.
Okay,
It's about understanding the complexities, the nuances, the contradictions.
that makes sense.
It's about learning from the past, both its triumphs and its tragedies, so we can create a better future.
So as we move forward, it's on us to learn from Wilson's legacy, both the good and the bad,
Yeah.
and strive for a world that lives up to the ideals he championed while rejecting the prejudices he embraced.
Absolutely. And perhaps the best way to honor his legacy, both the positive and the negative, is to engage in informed and thoughtful dialogue.
Yeah, like we're doing now.
Exactly, to challenge our own assumptions, to continue the pursuit of a more just and equitable society,
Hmm.
one that truly lives up to the ideals of democracy that Wilson so passionately, if imperfectly, championed.
I think that's a great place to leave it.
Yeah,
We've journeyed through the world of Woodrow Wilson, a president who embodied both progress and contradiction, leaving a lasting impact on America and the world.
he did.
I hope this has sparked your curiosity to delve even deeper into this fascinating and complex period of history. And who knows, maybe you'll uncover some new insights of your own. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.